I want to know who is my biological father. Dad's not my dad, is he? He put his arm around me and he said, let's go for a walk.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. And I do have an updated resource that I wanted to share with the listeners. A little over 20 episodes ago, I had on Jill Krasanovich, and she told her story. Actually, she went by the name Margot, and it was episode 194, and it was called Margot's Story, if you happen to listen to that. And she had a very toxic and chaotic childhood. It was a story that was hard to listen to. You just had a lot of compassion for her. In fact, listening to Jill was kind of a miracle because the woman she is today is so very different sounding than the childhood that she lived, if that makes sense. And her first book was called When the Apple Falls Far from the Tree, but she has a sequel out. It was just released December 12th, and so I wanted to put a link for it on justbeingjill.com. You can find that below, and I also wanted to tell you the name of her memoir. Her sequel memoir is called When You Shake the Family Tree. And so this is now available on justbeingjill.com, or at least it says it's available for pre-ordering, but I believe it's already launched and released. So I wanted to make note of that and let you guys know that there is a new NPE book out there, and it does detail a lot of information about her healing, her evolving, her process, everything she's been through. I believe that these books and these resources are so important for us, for our ever-growing community. Okay, let's get back to the episode. And welcome to episode 207. And today I am speaking with David. Hi, David.
Hey, Lily, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Fantastic.
Are you from the South by any chance? I'm just kind of guessing from how you speak.
I am. I live in Texas.
Oh, you do? Okay. I don't actually get to see people in person, so I sometimes just have to guess by how they sound. Have you lived in Texas your whole life?
Yes, ma'am, for the most part. I was born in North Carolina and soon after birth came here.
That makes sense. That's what I'm hearing.
And I just want to say this. I want to say to you, thank you so much for all that you've done here. This has been so incredible. Your podcast has been something that has helped me. There have been times that I've really struggled and had to leave you, and then I come back, and it's just so freeing. It's fantastic to hear these folks share their lives and be real. So it's great. Thank you.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate that. And I know that we spoke previously a few years ago. I was looking at my old emails, but it's taken a couple years for us to finally get together and record your story. So I'm really grateful that you're able to do this today.
Yes, ma'am. I'm looking forward to it.
Let's get to your story. Let's start with your family of origin and hear who was in your raising family and a little bit about what your childhood was like.
So I grew up with who I will always refer to as mom and dad, my two older brothers, myself, and my younger brother. My mother was previously married and had my two oldest brothers, who are 6 and 7 years older than me, from that marriage. And then she met my dad in 1969. They met married that year. That's just the way that I've always grown up. There was the story early on about how they had gone to the justice of the peace and gotten married and then had a church wedding later on. None of that really mattered or made sense. We were a family, and that's just who we were and what we were. I guess as I was growing up, and by the way, I was born November 16th of 1968. And so the only reason that matters is really not until later when I began to find all this out. But probably late teens, I always wanted to look like someone, but never did. It didn't lessen anything that I had for my parents with my parents, or especially my grandparents. I just never thought about it. I don't guess I was wise enough or smart enough to really know that anything like that was a possibility, because family is family, and that's just how I grew up and what I knew. But I met and married my wife in 1989, and she never questioned anything. And I remember there were some times that I would say to her, I just don't know. And she always supported the fact that, hey, I don't see that. I think that your dad is your dad. And I never got that anyone to support the thought process with me or for me, and which was fine. But then I turned 25, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. It was in May of that year, and I remember saying something to my mom one day. I guess this was one of my brave days. And I said, Mom, some things just don't add up. I was born in 68. You and Dad married in 69. So is Dad my dad? And she didn't say a word. Her response was, now I sit back, was so telling, but there was no response whatsoever. And it was really weird because she left the conversation, left the room, and went on. And I kind of left. I was sitting there just like, wow, that's weird. But the next day, I got a phone call from my dad, which wasn't unusual by any means. But he said to me, hey, if you have a few minutes when you get off work today, would you come by your mom's shop? I'd like to talk to you. I was like, sure. Never thought anything about it. And when I got there, he called me outside and he took this piece of paper and he put it in my face. He was real close to me. And he said, what does that say? I said, well, let me back that up a little bit where I can see it. And I pushed his hand back a little bit and I saw that it was my birth certificate. I said, well, it's my birth certificate. He goes, no. Whose name is on the father line? And I said, well, it's yours, Dad. He goes, that's right. And that's the way it's always been, and that's the way it's always going to be. And I thought, very interesting. But obviously, this makes some very uncomfortable conversations, so I'm just going to leave this alone. I wasn't really, I say, bold enough to pursue that anymore. I didn't want to hurt him. That was never my intent. And so I just left it alone. That was at 25. So in 2017, I remember I went to the eye doctor, and there was, that questionnaire about family history and glaucoma and, all of this stuff. And I remember sitting there thinking, I don't know. I don't know the answer to these questions. And so I finished my appointment, did the best I could, went on about my business, and I left there and I went to my oldest brother's place. His work, he owns his own business. He was just in his office alone, and I sat down and he goes, what's on your mind, man? And I said, Philip, I want to know who is my biological father. Dad's not my dad, is he? He put his arm around me and he said, let's go for a walk. So we took off walking out into this open field and probably walked 300 or 400 yards out there. And for probably the first 5 or 6 minutes, all he could do was really cry. And he said to me, no, he's not. But I want you to know, I've been sworn to secrecy. I've always wanted to tell you, but never could. And he played back a memory. He said, do you remember that time? He said, it's probably been 20 years ago. You and I were sitting in a deer stand together. And you asked me the same question. And he said, it wasn't long before that Mom had sworn me to secrecy, that I would never tell you. But I'm here to tell you today. And he said, no, Dad's not your dad. And I asked him, I said, do you have any idea who it could be? And he said, David, I have no idea. He said, I could guess. And he gave me a name, and we knew it. We knew beyond a shadow of a doubt it was not his biological father, who, when I was conceived, my mother was still legally married to. They were separated and had been for a little while, but we knew it wasn't him because I carry none of those genes. And so what's really crazy about that is later in the story, it's what we found that kind of made that funny, not funny. But we continued our talk some, and it really spurred on some things for me. So I got home, I was telling my wife, and I remember contacting this gentleman at Tarrant County is the county that my parents like married in and kind of grew up in their early marriage with us boys. And so I remember contacting Tarrant County about adoption records, how to get a hold of those, and just some of that information there, because I knew that my two older brothers had been adopted by our dad in or around 1974. And so got in touch with this guy. He pulled these records, and when he got them back, noticed, obviously knew that they were sealed, as most adoption records are. So I said, is there any way we can present these to a judge? I can find out some information. I need to know what took place. So they sent them to a judge here in the county, and I got an appointment with him, went and sat down in his office, and he opened them up. I remember him unsealing those and the feelings that I had. All of those emotions were just rampant in my life. Just at that very moment, it was me, Michelle, my wife, and my oldest brother, Philip. We were all sitting there, and he started thumbing through things, and this confused look on his face was weird to me. But the further he went, he looked up and he goes, who are Philip and Daryl? I said, well, this is Philip, and then his biological brother, Daryl. And he goes, I don't see your name anywhere in here. Like, this is not your records. We still to this day don't really understand how we got my name confused with those records. However, we did. And it was kind of telling because there were no adoption records for me, which kind of made it weird for me in the fact that, am I just crazy that dad is my dad? But I wasn't satisfied with even that. So the judge actually contacted Austin, our capital, and then they actually contacted North Carolina, where I was born. It was just a big circle. And he spent a couple of weeks on this trying to figure some things out. And he finally told me, you're just going to need to contact someone that does DNA and see what you can find. So this is pushing up on close to the end of 2017, and Michelle wound up buying me a DNA kit for Christmas. And so I took the test, sent it in. My results came back the first week of February. And I was probably more frustrated then than ever, because I look at these and I'm going, this is nuts. I can't understand this stuff. I don't understand what it's saying. But if I can time out for just a second and back up about 2 weeks, I remember going to my mother and I said, I want to talk to you because, just some things going on. Well, I went and sat down and I talked to her, and her response to me that day was undoubtedly the most tragic thing that I've heard yet. So I Michelle and I, because through this process, I never have done anything without her except today. And it's kind of funny that this is the only thing that in this entire process that I've ever done without her. But I remember sitting there and saying to my mom, I just want to know who my biological father is. And she said to me, I don't know why you're asking this. This is your father right here, talking about my dad. And I said, Mom, I know different. And I've taken DNA tests. I've started this process. I need for you to tell me. She gave me a name. Didn't know if I believed it, but her next response was that part that hurt so bad. And she said, at least I didn't abort you. And that changed my life because I thought, that's all you can say about this is defend yourself in saying that's what you didn't do? Why not try telling the truth? But I've never forgotten those words. I don't guess that I will ever forget those words. We took the information she gave us. We immediately went home, looked at my DNA results, which came in a couple of weeks later. My wife, being the Miss Detective that she is, she went online, started chasing that name. We found a gentleman that lived in Dallas with the last name, and we actually drove to his house. I knocked on his door and said, well, before I ever got anything out of my mouth, I'm looking at him going, you can't be my father. I stand 6'5" and at one time weighed almost 400 pounds. And this guy was probably about 5'3" and weighed 120. That just didn't fit the bill. So I discounted that one rather quickly. But I continued to chase things, and I couldn't come up. And so once those results came in, the very first name on my list was the name of Falls. Well, my mother had given me the name Null. And I thought, has she lied to us again? And so I contacted this Falls person, and she changed my life in ways that I really can never express. Stephanie is the angel in my life. She did all of my DNA work. And it was strange that there was no connection in the Falls and Null name whatsoever, as we found out. But in that conversation, it wound up being that I contacted her through Ancestry, and then we left and went to email. And finally, I just said, you know what, call me or let me call you. Let's talk. And all within probably a couple hours, we were on the phone together and talked for a long period of time that evening. And before that conversation was over, just because of some things that took place for me the previous few weeks, I remember she said to me, do you think there is any chance that your father could be your grandfather or your uncle? I said, I don't know what to believe at this point. And so, because of some health problems that I've had, we began to believe that that could be the case based on some results in my DNA that she found. But then she couldn't really figure it out. And so she asked me if I could take a Y-DNA test. And that would kind of help her because there's something, again, I'm not real smart with that kind of stuff. That's why I had her. But I took this test, and I remember I was about to meet with her that evening when the results came in, and she contacted me on my way and told me that no, there was no chance that my biological father could be my grandfather or uncle, which was a huge relief, obviously. So that night, 6th of February, was when really my life began to change. And it was really tough a number of months. Didn't sleep a lot, I cried a lot. And so she started her quest in finding my biological father. She took all of the information, put it together, So when Stephanie and I met that first night, for the next things that we found were just back and forth. And one thing she called me about one night, and she knew this was something that was really important to me, was my original birth certificate. Because when I contacted the state of North Carolina, they would not give me any information about what was in my file because apparently that has been sealed, and in North Carolina it can't be unsealed. And so I'm like, what could it be? And some information that I got, and I don't remember exactly how I got this, but there were two things. My original birth certificate she found, and my original birth certificate had the name of my mother's, what was then husband, on it. So obviously we knew that he was not my biological father, just based on looking at me and my brothers. But that was it was very hurtful to get that. But then something else that Stephanie found was there was no adoption done. There was what they call an affidavit of parentage done, where my mother and my dad signed this affidavit stating that he was my biological father and needed to be added to the birth certificate. And then that was in 1974. The original birth certificate was amended with my new name. And so, again, extremely hurtful thing to find that there were lies, that because she knew that he was not my biological father. And so we just continued on with the quest to find who it was, and Stephanie was just determined to find out who it was, because that was just something I needed. And so weeks and weeks passed. She would ask for information. I would do my best to find it. My oldest brother and next oldest brother were both good resources for me. So my brother had cut me off, and so that was just a reasonably normal thing, that he would kind of leave me and then come back to me later. The relationship never has been great, but I think he is so tied to mom that he felt guilty for giving me information. And so he just kind of cut me off from there, and which was fine. Again, we continued to search. That didn't stop us. It just kind of slowed down one of our resources. And so we get up to the beginning of April of 2018. And I remember it was April 4th. I spoke to Stephanie late in the evening, and she told me, she said, I hate to even have this conversation with you right now, but I know that your biological father is one of two men. And I'm like, okay, tell me who it is. She didn't want to. She did. And she said, it's either John Jr. or John Sr. I don't know yet, but it's one of them. She said, I've got to find out some information. I'm going to do everything. I'm not going to bed until I find this out. This was about 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. So I did my best. I went to bed. I usually, at that time, I would, we'd get up about 1 o'clock to go to work. And I remember getting a text at 12:54. And at 12:55, she called me. And when I answered the phone, I just said to her, who is it? And my question was not, who's calling me? It was, who is my father? And she said, unequivocally, it is John Null Jr. And my question for her was, is he alive? And she said, yes, he is. And I said, I need to talk to him. And she said, I've already got everything that you're going to need to get in touch with him. I've got his address. I've got his phone number. She said, I've got everything that you're going to want or need. So I got through my day that afternoon. Michelle and I got in the car, and I drove to his house. And I sat in front of his house. And the one thing that I go back to from the very beginning of this, I said to my wife, it was a commitment that I made not only to myself, but to my parents and to my future of finding out who my biological father was. The commitment that I made was I will never in any way intentionally hurt any of these people because, I mean, this is an extremely sensitive subject. It's going to hurt people, but I did not want to hurt them just for the sake of digging. And so when I sat in front of his house that day, I told her, I said, I can't do this because his wife potentially is there. His daughters potentially are there. And I'm not going to do that to them. And so I went around the corner, sat down on a little picnic table at this school, and I called him. And I said, John, is this John Null? And he said, yes, sir, it is. Who's speaking? And I told him, I said, this is David Shulock. I just want you to know that I'm your son. And there was a long pause. And he said to me, well, how do you know? And I said, well, I have DNA that proves it. Well, I've never taken a DNA test. And I said, well, fortunately for me, in this world we live in today, you don't have to have taken one. And I have proof that you are my father. And he said, can I call you in a few days? I said, absolutely. I would love to hear back from you. I'll be waiting on your call day or night. And we hung up. I remember waiting. That was on a Thursday. I remember waiting Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, nothing. And I thought he's never going to call me again. And on Wednesday afternoon, I had taken a break and got my boat and went to the lake. I was sitting in the middle of the lake and my phone rings and it's him. And he said, I'd like to talk to you. And I said, can we meet? And he said, well, soon, maybe. Let's see what we can talk about today. So he actually talked, provided, just telling me about a receipt that he had kept over the years from flowers that he had sent my mom when I was born to her parents' house. And I was shocked that he knew that the fact that he even had a receipt. And so that comes into play when later in our conversations that we had, he was telling me that, and I think this actually came from other sources, that he had started looking around on DNA websites and whatever in the middle to late 90s. And I think he was probably trying to find me. And so, which was, some relief to me. Maybe he did care about me. And the fact that my mom said that, he never wanted anything to do with me. I think she probably ran and just moved on with her life, But I was able to meet with John, 8 or 10 times. We had lunch together. We've gone on some car rides together, just kind of getting to know one another, which was nice. It wound up that my entire life, I lived probably about 25 or 30 miles from him and never knew it until, the last few years. I remember telling him in one of our conversations that I wanted him to tell his wife and his I didn't know his daughters at that time, but his kids about me. And he said, well, I'll tell my wife eventually, but my girls are off limits. And I said, well, I really think that you need to tell them. And I remember, I'm pretty sure it was in that original conversation, I said to him, I just don't want to be that guy that shows up to your funeral and says to your girls, hey, I'm your brother. And I said, I will. because I think it's important that they know. John died November 29th, 21. And I found out on Thursday, December 2nd of 21, because the obituary came through to my phone, and when I got that notification, it really rocked my world. But what really rocked my world in that is one of the last lines of the obituary was, John chose not to have a funeral. Because I think he just wanted to literally carry this to his grave with him.
Mm.
And that hurt so bad. But me being me, and with the support of my wife, I wanted so bad that day, as soon as I found out, to contact those girls and let them know about me. But then again, it goes back to my original thought of, but I don't want to hurt not just John, not just my parents, but those girls. That's important to me. But I knew one day I would. And so, as I promised John, in February of 22, I contacted Gail and Susan. And their response to me was, we would love to meet you. We're a little surprised, but we're not surprised, but we would love to meet you. So about 3 weeks later, we arranged an opportunity to sit down at a restaurant to eat lunch. With my wife in tow, we went and sat down, got there about 20 minutes before the girls did, or our arranged time, and they showed up right on time. And when they walked in, Susan walked in first. There was about 5 or 6 stairs up to this level to where I was. And I remember seeing her, and I thought, other than Facebook pictures, I'd never seen anything, never seen them before or anything. And when I saw her walk in the door, I thought, wow, there I am. And then Gail walked in, and I had to repeat it. Huh, there's my other one. And I don't know that they ever asked if I was there. They scanned the room and saw me, and it was as if they floated up there to me. They ran, they floated, they were there just seamlessly. And I'll never forget them grabbing me. And some of the first words out of their mouth were, oh my God, you look just like Dad. That to me made my life. Because all of my time, all of my life growing up, I just needed to look like someone. And with someone else, those girls telling me, man, you look just like Dad, was just incredible to me. And then we were just sitting around the table there talking, and they would look at me, and I remember Gail reaching over and touching my hands and saying, man, you got Dad's hands. And so it was just so, there was so much peace came over me with those girls. They have truly been a lifeline to me. What they have given me the last 3 years is so much more than they could ever imagine. Just the peace and the joy that they have given me has been remarkable. And so we continue to have a relationship. We speak, reasonably often. Sometimes it's a little more than any of us want, but it's just recently we went and ate dinner, and they were both like, we just need to do this more often. We got to get together. And so it's just nice to have someone in your life is like you, that has so much of you in them, and that you can sit and know that you look like, and that you think like, and that you have the same types of emotions. And there's a joy in that. And so it's really good when we're able to meet and sit down. Susan has a son, and I'll never forget the first time I got to meet him. I remember we met at a restaurant, and he walked in, Mr. Bubbly. He walked in and he said, "Uncle David, it's great to meet you." And so I just remember that just brought, again, that joy. I thought, wow, there's truly someone in my life that just loves me unconditionally. And it's just so nice. And so we've been able to carry that on. And unfortunately now, I've still never even talked to my mother about having met them, or none of that. And I don't care to have that conversation with her. I don't care for her to know any of it. She didn't want to know anything about John. And so why would I share that joy with her? And so we just continue on with our lives. The numerous things, but just the things that I've gathered out of all of this is that there are times in our lives that we have those extreme lows when we've been rejected and lied to, and stories come out that just aren't real, and they want to tell you how wrong you are for pursuing these opportunities, for even having a desire to want to pursue finding your biological father. But the one thing I say, every man, woman, boy, and girl deserves to know who their parents are, their biological parents. They deserve that. It's their right. This is my right. This is my story. I'm going to tell my story to who I want to tell it to. I'm going to tell my story when I want to tell it. And I'm not going to hide anything. I have nothing to hide. If someone else, my mother, my dad, anyone in this world wants me to not tell something, I just say, shame on you. Everyone deserves this opportunity. The way this has changed my life has just been incredible. We are truly people of faith, and the provisions that God has provided in my life over the last number of years has been absolutely amazing. I don't deserve those, but I am thankful for them. And I'm just thankful that all of the people that are a part of this story are so willing to allow me to share, or open themselves and continue to want to talk. I mentioned earlier that my son was the one person that could have stopped this process of never going on this podcast, of just never sharing my story, period. He is the only one that could have ever stopped this. Because, like myself, this very directly affects him. This very directly affects him because the name he continues to carry. Not that it affects my daughter any less, but she's had the opportunity to change her name, to get married, to move on with that life. It's really strange to see how my children have reacted to me over this. My daughter is like me, very upfront, very in your face, very, hey, Dad, go attack, go make sure that Mom and Grandma and Grandpa know about this. And I'm just like, hey, pull back on the reins a little bit, baby. Let's calm down. No, Dad, you go after it. They've hurt you. They've hurt me. They deserve anything that's coming to them. And my son is just the opposite, very private about it. He is just in the last probably 6 months come to a point that he will openly talk to me about it. And we've had some conversations that have just been wonderful. And so one thing I say to folks is, as you find out about this, one of the things that has been great for me, and I just assume with all the stories that I've heard on this podcast and others, that Tell your story. And just remember you're telling your story. Don't allow your mother, your father, whoever, don't allow anyone to put you in a cage and tell you that you can't tell that story because it's yours. So tell it. I'm willing to share with anyone that wants to call or email me anytime.
That is so wonderful to know, because every so often I do get some follow-up emails. And David, what would be the best way to contact you if someone wanted to reach out to you?
That would be through my email. And if you want me to give that to you now, I can.
Yes, go right ahead.
It's my full name, David Shulak, SULAK, 01@yahoo.com.
And I will put that email address down below. And David, thank you so much for sharing your story today. It was just a pleasure to listen to, and what a process, what a journey you've been through. And thank you for coming on and sharing today.
You bet, anytime.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come, heal with us.